I'm Brandi Kruse. This is Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Undivided is presented by our founding sponsor, 1530 Mortgage. Today, what exactly is a recession? Do you know the definition of recession? Well, the White House is apparently trying to change that definition ahead of what is expected to be a pretty bad economic report on Thursday. Also, firing firefighters who failed to get a COVID vaccine was done, we were told, to keep people safe, to keep the public safe, to keep firefighters safe. But apparently, it hasn't stopped infections of COVID-19 among firefighters in one city. And all it's really doing is costing taxpayers a heck of a lot of money in overtime. We'll discuss that. Plus, he spent time in federal prison for drug crimes. Now he's documenting the decline of San Francisco. Ricci Wynne joins me to talk about the crisis unfolding on the streets of his hometown.
These little kids got to walk through this shit. This shit is crazy.
But we start first with the economy, which, as you know, is not doing very well. But the White House apparently thinks you're dumb and thinks it can convince you that what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're spending isn't reality. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call gaslighting. There is an economic report that is due out on Thursday. It is the second quarter GDP data. And if it reflects a second quarter decline in GDP, there was a decline in the first quarter, then the widely accepted sort of definition of a recession would be met. But the White House and its economic advisors are slowly behind the scenes trying to convince Americans that that's not really what a recession is. They posted this blog post at whitehouse.gov. The headline, "How do economists determine whether the economy is in a recession?" It starts by saying, what is a recession? What is a recession? Well, some maintain that 2 consecutive quarters of falling real GDP constitute a recession. That is neither the official definition nor the way economists evaluate the state of the business cycle. So clearly, if they have to write a blog post on whitehouse.gov entitled, "How do economists determine whether the economy is in a recession?" that's a pretty good indicator that they're very, very worried about the potential of a recession. So they write this blog post basically saying the accepted definition or standard for recession that we've used for years and years and years is not actually the accepted definition for recession, and it's much more nuanced and complicated than that. And of course, the administration made the rounds on cable news trying to, I think, prepare Americans or gaslight Americans ahead of this report on Thursday.
Comments from some saying 2 quarters of negative growth in a row, that's a recession.
Right, and certainly in terms of the technical definition, it's not a recession. The technical definition considers a much broader spectrum of data points. We are seeing a slowing. That is not only expected but necessary as we operate through this transition. So that's where our focus is in terms of diagnosing the economy. That's going to be our focus, and I think that we need to train that focus on that rather than on sort of technical debates about backward-looking data.
Next week's a very big week for the economy. So I read the CEA blog. Is the White House trying to change the common definition of a recession because next Thursday the GDP numbers coming out are going to show that we've been in a recession?
So let me say this, the strength of our labor market along with the other economic factors is what we generally see in a recession or even is not what we generally see in a recession or even a pre-recession, because we're seeing the strength of the economy and the labor market. So that's really important to note there because those are key elements as we talk about that, as folks keep asking us about that. So Americans across the country are back to work at a historic level. 21 states, the most in history, have unemployment rates at or below 3%. That is an important number to note. 14 states are now at their lowest unemployment rates since this series began in 1976. And last month, the unemployment rate was a new low in 8 states. So again, the strength of our labor market, along with the economic indicators, is not what we generally see as we talk about recession or even pre-recession.
But the growth of the job for the 3 months trend, the growth of job growth in the U.S. is shrinking, is decreasing, and 7.5 million people, a growing number, are multi-jobs, meaning they have to work more than one job to afford a living. So is jobs really a good indicator then?
Look, Here's what I would say. We've always talked about the strength of our economy. We've always talked about how historic it's been, and we've always talked about the transitioning, right? The transitioning to more stable and steady growth. And so to your point about the job growth there, this is what we have been kind of stating for the past several months. Look, the economy created 1.1 million jobs in the second quarter. And around 375 jobs per month. Those are historic numbers. Those are, if you think about the 1.1 million jobs, we are back to where we were at pre-pandemic levels. So that is what we see as strength of the economy. Again, we're going to transition into a more stable and steady growth, and so we're going to continue the work that the president has set out to do to make sure that we continue to deliver for the American people when it comes to the economy.
So according to the White House, what really matters is not real GDP, is not a potential second quarter of real GDP decline. What actually matters is job creation and consumer spending, which they say are great. Those are the things that matter. The high gas prices you've been paying at the pump, that doesn't matter. Inflation at a 40-year high, well, that doesn't matter. The fact that only 18% of Americans think the economy is in good shape, that doesn't matter. The fact that President Joe Biden's approval ratings, largely because of his handling of the economy, are in the gutter, that doesn't matter. If you think for a second that Democrats would be encouraging Americans to accept a new, more nuanced definition of recession if we were under a Republican president, then you're fooling yourself. But I know that nobody who listens to Undivided thinks that, because we all have, like I said, a brain, and we can think for ourselves. I think what really bothers me about this, and you're going to see a lot of back and forth in the media about, the White House trying to redefine recession ahead of this report on Thursday and what the actual definition of recession is. Honestly, I don't care. I don't care how the White House wants to define recession. I don't care how economists want to define recession. All I care about is how people are actually doing and how people are actually feeling. All I care about is that working class Americans can afford to fill up their gas tank without having to worry about whether they can also pay for food. All I care about is whether someone's paycheck is going as far as it was last month. We get so caught up in the media and politics of trying to define something, trying to say, oh, does this meet the definition of recession or not? How are people doing? How are people faring economically? How are people getting by? The answer is not well for many middle class and low income Americans. Isn't that what matters at the end of the day? Not if you can score some political win or get out of being the president that put us into a recession. This has been my complaint about Joe Biden for months, about his blame game when it came to gas prices, how he blamed everyone you could think of. He blamed Putin, which I think that obviously has something to do with it, but then he blamed Republicans, he blamed former President Donald Trump, he blamed mom and pop gas stations, he blamed oil producers. Anyone he could think of on Twitter to blame, he blamed for the cost of gasoline. And now, I don't know if you saw this, the cost of gas has been going down a little bit. And now, all of a sudden, that gas prices are on the decline. Biden's Twitter account is taking credit for every single penny. He tweeted, "For American families looking for a little more breathing room, these savings matter." It was accompanied by a graphic that said, at current prices, the average driver will spend $35 less per month for one person or $70 less per month for a family with 2 cars than they would have if gas prices stayed at their peak. And then he keeps tweeting out the update on where gas prices are, down 65 cents over 40 days. He tweets, "If you live in South Carolina, Texas, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, or Tennessee, the average price of gas at the pump is under $4 a gallon. That's a big deal." I should note that those are all Republican states who have lower gas prices than, say, a state like Washington or in California, where they tax gas to high heaven, and that's why gas here is significantly over $4 a gallon. And it's always interesting to me. One more from the president. You might have to be watching the podcast to see this, but He tweeted out this picture of him. And of course, the president has COVID-19, so he's sort of been in his office. And I wish the president a speedy recovery from his COVID. And he's got this, they took this, his staff just fails him, this dumb picture, him sitting at his desk on this Zoom with economic advisors. And he's got this chart, and it says average retail gas prices. And the chart is just plummeting. Makes it look like gas prices have dropped $4 a gallon. So he tweeted it out saying, or his staff did, gas prices are declining at one of the fastest rates we have seen in over a decade. We're not letting up on our work to lower costs even further. Yeah, when they get that high, not a surprise that they would then decline at the fastest rate in over a decade. And, this is what I go back to about, look, if you want credit for gas prices falling, you have to take credit for gas prices rising. You have to take the blame for that. When you're the president or the governor or whatever it is, every problem is your problem. Every solution requires you to work towards a solution. And so I just think this is ridiculous. And to me, it's so transparent. It's just reading the president's Twitter timeline is so transparent to me about the desperation, the gaslighting. And I just think, who reads these tweets and thinks, oh, thank you, Mr. President, you're doing a great job. Again, it's not about politics. It's about leadership. It's about just acknowledging that, look, things are tough for Americans right now. There's no way around that. I'm not going to push off blame. I'm the president. I'm going to try to make things better. And that's all, at the end of the day, I care about. Focus on making things better. Don't focus on trying to convince Americans that we're not actually in a recession if we are in a recession. Don't focus on trying to convince Americans that you're responsible for some monumental drop in gas prices when they hit record numbers under your watch. Just try to make things better. At the end of the day, that is what matters most, and that is what should matter most to the President of the United States. I've made it very clear how I feel about vaccine mandates, particularly when it came to first responders. We're in a public safety crisis. And so I looked at these two issues, a health crisis, which COVID was at some point, it's not anymore, and then a public safety crisis. And you're going to tell me that when you have, record high murder rate, when it is shown that you can still transmit COVID-19 even with the vaccine and boosters, that you're going to choose to fire firefighters and police officers and nurses for not getting a vaccine. And you're going to prioritize a health crisis that's over versus a public safety crisis that's still ongoing. And we're starting to see some information that shows really how tragic of a decision this is, and how if the goal here was to keep the public safe, elected leaders who carried out these vaccine mandates completely failed the public in that regard. Ari Hoffman, our friend who has joined us for Fridays with Friends this past week, radio host for KVI in Seattle, 570 KVI, he got his hands on some data regarding numbers with the Seattle Fire Department. So he spoke to a whistleblower who told him that the staffing crisis is so dire, quote, someone is going to get killed, in regards to their inability to staff the fire department in the way that it ought to be staffed. What he found in looking through some data and emails is that after Seattle firefighters were terminated for not getting the jab, infections actually went up among Seattle firefighters, and he released some data. So in August of 2021, there were 10 infections. And then if you fast forward to December of 2021, this is, post-mandate, there were 88 infections. Now to January of 2022, 150 infections. Again, everyone remaining on the force has a vaccine. So you actually had the number of infections go up post-mandate. And you had, as a result, more and more firefighters who had to call in sick to work, who were off the job. And so that resulted in overtime costs rising rapidly. According to Ari Hoffman and the data that he uncovered, overtime more than doubled from March 2021 to March 2022. So March 2021, it was about $1.3 million in overtime expenses. Fast forward a year, more than $3 million in overtime expenses to deal with the staffing shortages. So as a result of more of these firefighters getting infected with COVID-19 than pre-mandate, you have more of them calling out sick. And so the staffing is reduced. So you have additional units that are out of service. far more now than pre-mandate. And so now you're talking about a risk to the public. If you have units out of service, takes longer to be able to respond to urgent 911 calls. So again, you go back to the rationale for the mandate, which maybe at the very beginning made sense before we realized really the extent to which the vaccine would help reduce transmission and reduce spread. The intent was to keep the public safe. And I would just ask you that simple question. Is the vaccine mandate keeping the public safe? Is the vaccine mandate keeping the public safe? Is there a net benefit when it comes to public safety from the vaccine mandate? I mean, demonstrably, I think the answer has to be unequivocally no. And you look at Governor Jay Inslee, we talked about this on the show Friday, about Governor Jay Inslee now rolling out this plan to recruit more police officers when police officers across the state were fired for failing to get a vaccine mandate. When the governor himself fired about 80 Washington state troopers for failing to get the vaccine. And now he wants to go out and come up with ways to hire more troopers. It's like, well, hire back the ones that you fired for failing to get a vaccine that is not reducing in a significant or meaningful way the spread of COVID-19. To me, this is just common sense at this point. It's not about being anti-vax. It's not about not believing that, COVID wasn't real. It's about common sense. And if we are using common sense, there is no reason why we should not be hiring back firefighters, first responders of any kind, law enforcement, nurses who were fired over the vaccine mandates. It makes absolutely no sense. I have a really interesting guest for you on the podcast today. I want to introduce you to a guy named Ricci Wynne. I first came across him because he posted this video on Twitter.
Come on, man.
And it shows these school kids getting off a bus stop in San Francisco.
These little kids got to walk through this shit. This shit is crazy.
And they come off the bus stop and it's just this sidewalk full of drug users. And that's what these kids are confronted with. And so I ended up looking into Ricci's Twitter account, and he takes a lot of these videos around town in San Francisco showing just the dire state of things.
It's actually the courthouse. You guys should probably clean it up. It's the federal courthouse.
He joined the unDivided podcast to talk about why he started filming this stuff. Ricci, welcome to unDivided. Introduce yourself to our Seattle audience.
First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Ricci Wynne. I'm a recovering addict. Had some rough run-ins with criminal. I had some rough run-ins with the law before. Did a federal sentence and came home with a fresh pair of eyes and kind of seen the state my city was in, and kind of now taken to Twitter to kind of try to open up some of the politicians' eyes about what works and what doesn't work.
Man, I like that you just get the baggage out of the way right away. I'm used to interviewing politicians and they hide all their baggage. I could just get it out. What'd you do a federal sentence on, can I ask?
So it was for trafficking cocaine and gun possession. Yeah.
Not only did you emerge with a fresh set of eyes, but you were just telling me before we started what your day job is. Can you tell me what you do during the day?
So during the day, I work at a drug rehab. And I basically try to connect recovering addicts with services. I kind of run like a little morning meeting, do intake stuff for them. Yeah.
And you're working at night too. You're like working around the clock. You got two jobs.
Yeah, that's the state of San Francisco right now is, the rent is sky high. So you got to there's no, unless you're getting paid, like $100,000 a year in your current job, it's kind of hard to keep just a roof over your head working one job. So I'm actually forced to work two jobs. So I work at a restaurant as well at night. It's called the Pawn Shop. It's a pretty cool speakeasy. We just made San Francisco bucket list. It's, we're trending. We just did A&E just came and filmed in the restaurant just the other day for a new series they're coming out with, which is a spin-off of old series they had, which was 1,000 Ways to Die. This one's called 1,000 Ways to Dine. So it's kind of cool.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your background. It gives me, I didn't know a lot of that about you either. As I was telling you, just stumbled across your timeline because of the video I just showed my audience of kids coming off a bus stop, right out onto a street with a bunch of people just, living in poverty, using drugs. What was it that prompted you, I guess, to start documenting it and putting it out on social media, the state of the city?
Like I said, I kind of came home with a fresh pair of eyes. The only thing I could equate it to is if you've seen a family member slowly deteriorate over time, it's a little bit, it's kind of, you don't notice it as much, right? Because you're just seeing them every day, right? Or if you see them gain weight slowly over time, you don't really notice it, right? Or your significant other, right? You don't really notice them gaining this weight, but when you go away for quite some time, like I did, and then I came home back to San Francisco, it was like, whoa. It's kind of like seeing, your significant other after maybe 3 years, and then, they gained all this weight, and you're like, whoa, it's a shock, right? You actually see it for what it is. Now, the first job I was able to land coming out of incarceration was something called Pit Stop, where we basically monitor the public using these restrooms run by JC Decor, and we log people going in and out. It's pretty obvious that a lot of these restrooms are getting used by unhoused individuals, people out on the streets of San Francisco that are, using drugs and whatnot. So being in these high traffic areas, and I kind of was just sitting there observing for 8 hours a day, sitting there, and I'm just like, whoa, you see a lot of mentally ill individuals. You see a lot of people using in plain sight right in front of the police station, to the point where it's like, it didn't make too much sense, right? It was just kind of like, whoa, like here is somebody using a Class A felony, smoking crystal meth or smoking poisonous fentanyl right in front of the police station. And you're just like, why is no one doing anything about this? I don't understand the policy behind this. I don't get it. It didn't make sense, especially for an individual that just came home from, federal incarceration, where the police followed me for 3 months, and it made this, chase me around and pinged my phone. I was just kind of like, how are these individuals sitting out here selling this drug all day, and there's like nothing's happening to them? I didn't get it. It didn't make sense to me.
So there was this part of you then that was like, hey, I did my crime, I did my time, and now you've just got people out there brazenly breaking the law and nothing's happening to them?
Yeah, it was very shocking. And for, a person that came up with a really traumatic childhood, and coming through the stuff that I've been through, I kind of, my parents being addicts themselves, they were like always justifying their using, always rationalizing something. So for me, I became that in my own head, like to where I rationalized a lot of the crimes I was doing throughout the years. I processed a lot of that through the New Bridge program, Delancey Street, and really came to realize that I'm like a master at rationalizing my own bullshit. So I say all that to say, when I see, it's hard for a recovering addict, a recovering criminal that's trying to reform their life, to come home to such a crazy scene like that, because you're watching it happen, and you're like, whoa, why don't I try that again? They're getting away with it. Why don't I do it again? So it's really, really hard struggle to get to stay on the right path. And I'll tell you this, there's even institutions that I really don't disagree with, and you'll see it on my Twitter. I confronted them. They're called harm reduction, right? And they would set up these tents, and they were giving out what they call, harm reduction tools or whatever. But in reality, all it is paraphernalia, right? Mm-hmm. They're giving out tinfoil straws, Brillo pads, crack pipes. I mean, they're giving out all these things for needles, right? I mean, it's just, it's hard to believe, right? And you're like, you have this government entity that's giving this out. You then right down the street from it, these individuals are selling the drugs. You're like, is this all part of like some system? Like, I don't understand. And so it's kind of hard for you to be like, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. So it's definitely something I've been struggling with. And I think that's kind of another reason why I've been speaking out about it. And as of recently, I just lost my baby cousin, not a baby cousin, but he was my younger cousin, Bobby Davalos. He just passed away from a fentanyl poisoning. I call it poisoning because I don't believe he knew what he was taking. It was a pill, and it was, I guess, laced with fentanyl, and he passed away from it. Wow. So, my family's, still grieving through that. And, I think that galvanized my stance on this fentanyl epidemic, and kind of really made me angry that the politicians and these people are not stopping this substance from coming into the country. And in San Francisco locally, they're just not prosecuting for people selling it.
Wow. Well, first of all, my condolences. I'm sorry to hear about your family member. That's horrible. But, you've been seeing it all over. And a lot of what you're describing is what we've been seeing in Seattle as well. You mentioned these harm reduction kits, quote unquote, harm reduction. As a former addict, I mean, the argument people make for them is that you got a clean needle, for instance, you're less likely to get an infection, or you're less likely to die. As a former addict, do you buy into that? Do you understand that?
Absolutely not. The fact of the matter is, you're dealing with at least a subset of a lot of the individuals that are getting these things from those tents they're dual diagnosed, right? They are suffering from a severe mental health disorders. These are people that would collect anything. They would, probably almost be on the verge of like hoarding. So you're giving away anything for free, they're going to take it. And it's hard for them, like I just said, with me, the rationalization and to be able to fight this addiction, you have to feel a bit of shame and feel remorse for what you're doing, right? And by them giving that stuff out on the streets, and you can see it in the reaction when I confront some of the addicts on my videos. They almost are indignant, or like they almost feel like I'm the one in the wrong for calling them out for doing it. It's like it's absurd, and you just like, what? The only way people get to that level of brazen behavior is when they actually think that they're right for doing it. And with these homeless advocates and these harm reduction people, they're all just like, well, we'll meet you where you're at. And that's not my form of recovery. I don't think that's recovery at all. That's just, like I said, enabling these individuals. They need to be, people need to have a little forced rehabilitation to get off these substances. Now, do I think that San Francisco will be a drug-free utopia? Absolutely not. But I think that there should be at least a level of shame in doing it, right? So they should at least be pushed back to the out of the public's eye, right? And that's one thing that was really alarming about that video that caught so much steam, right? It wasn't the first time I filmed these guys using drugs in front of children, and so nobody wants to have their child see that. I find it hard to believe anybody wants their child to see that.
Well, as someone who grew up around substance abuse and then fell into substance abuse himself, what impact do you believe it has on those kids to step off their bus and see that every day?
It's definitely dehumanizing. It desensitizes them to the drug use. It's along with a whole bunch of other hosts of things, when these individuals are on those substances, they act really erratic and like almost, or at least the ones that are, a lot of the ones that are methamphetamine, they get into a point of like psychosis, and they almost like, you'll see in a interview I did with Channel 7 News, in the middle of the interview, the guy just came up and just started yelling at me and the reporter. I mean, they just are a little bit, like I said, unstable. And so having these people jump out at you and jarring, yelling at you, violent, volatile, if you will, do these things to you. I mean, as a kid, it's got to be frightening, right? I mean, so you could just imagine that there's a little maybe PTSD that may arise from it, there's just a lot of things, that I just think that needs to be addressed when it comes to children seeing these types of atrocities,
Yeah, and I mean, the point I made when I shared your tweet was no politician would let their kids step off a bus there. And so if it's not okay for their kids, it's not okay for anyone's kids. And it's really shameful. How is San Francisco home for you? Is it born and raised?
Yeah, born and raised, born at St. Luke's Hospital. Grew up in all the pretty, bad areas of the city. I've stayed almost everywhere, through Section 8 and low income housing, from place to place, so yeah, definitely San Francisco's home.
We've been talking about the San Francisco voters who ousted the uber progressive DA there. Do you have hope for the city that there's some sort of change happening? Because we're not down there. We don't see it every day. You do.
You know what? Man, it's just so much. It's so much. They have dug themselves into such a hole with all these policies that they've made. It's kind of hard to like backtrack on some of them now. You have a sanctuary city where a lot of individuals that are selling these drugs are undocumented. So it's kind of hard to like rid yourself of these individuals that have just like, embedded themselves in there. They almost come as commuters, right? That's how organized or like that their little operation is. They don't even live in San Francisco. A majority of these dealers that are out there in the open air drug market, they come from the East Bay, and they, like I said, they commute through BART, come into the city, they sell their drugs, and then at the end of the night or whenever their shift is over, they'll go back to where the city that they're from. So it's kind of hard for the local police to get a hold on it, because there's no really house to raid. There's no anything like that. There's very little cell phone contact, right? As far as like a drug dealer would do, they would tap their phone or whatever. But when it's this open air drug market, people just pull up and it's very easy. But I'm not saying it's uncompatible, right? I mean, I drove. I'm gonna post one today, a new video, so you guys check it out. It was literally me going to the gym this morning. I was driving. It's like light tint on my car, but I'm able to pull to the corner of where I live. And literally, I was able to zoom in with my phone of a drug transaction happened right in front of my face. So nothing has really changed. It's not like a magic light switch that this new DA came in and this it's just gonna get cleaned up. I think if you ask me, if they took my if they wanted my opinion for it, it would be a multi-pronged solution. One would be start cracking down on the open air drug markets. Once you arrest these individuals, try to give them a stay away from the city, right? You have to give them a stay away from the city because they're a public nuisance and they continue to keep coming back there and doing these things. They've implemented stay away orders for people that grew up in neighborhoods because they were involved in gang activities. I remember briefly, like a lot of people got stay away orders from neighborhoods they grew up in. So I don't really understand how hard it is to implement a stay away order for individuals that are A, not from the city, and B, most likely from another country that are here undocumented. Like I said, it's touchy though, right? You got the American Civil Liberty Union fighting for a lot of these individuals to stay. I personally, like I said, I work in the restaurant industry, and I know the restaurant industry runs on the backs of a lot of undocumented workers. So I appreciate the ones that come here that want a new life. the undocumented people that come here that want a new life and that are willing to work the American way and legal way and get their money the right way, instead of selling as poison on the street. But I feel like these individuals that are selling it, if they get busted or they get in trouble for it, they need to be somehow either locked up or deported or removed somehow, or like I said, redirected, right? Get them connected with some services that will change their life, right? If we're gonna continue to just let it happen, the next approach I would say is like like some type of mental health response team, because you see these people, like I said, they're in psychosis, and you can clearly tell they're having a mental health like emergency. Like, so I think that there should be maybe a team that will come and, get these guys, stabilize them on their meds, and then, like I said, again, try to reintegrate them into society or connect them with services that will help them. There's actually a program that I just heard about. It's called Homeward Bound. I think things like that should happen more, because a lot of these individuals are not from San Francisco. A lot of these individuals are from other states. So this little nonprofit that's called Homeward Bound is they try to get them a one-way ticket back to whatever they came from. So in that way, hopefully they get back to their supports, their support circle, which is hopefully their family.
Yeah, well, let's end with this quickly. In Seattle, if you said some of the things that you said, you'd be painted as right-wing, like you'd be vilified for going out there, for filming some of these things. Are you getting vilified down there for pointing out some of these problems?
Not necessarily, no. It's been all quiet on the home front as far as like there's been a couple individuals that like maybe say something along the lines, but the vast majority of the people agree with what I'm saying. I talk about it a lot, even in person, and talk to individuals that are around the city. I find it really, I don't know how these policies got passed, or got implemented, because when you talk to the vast majority of the people that live in San Francisco, they'll tell you the number one problem is this drug markets and the homelessness, right?
Yeah. Well, how can people watch your stuff?
So yeah, you can watch my stuff on Twitter at Raw Ricci 415. That's AWRICCI 415. I'm gonna post a new video today. Like I said, I had my little undercover work, but yeah, I'll definitely I'll keep posting on there. Or you can check me out on Instagram on the same username at Raw Ricci 415.
Thank you to Ricci for joining us. A really interesting guy. I mean, this is what you want people who are formerly incarcerated to do with their lives, to be out, to be working, to be helping other people better their lives. And I think that some of the things he's bringing attention to are really important. I wish there were some politicians in San Francisco who would listen to what he was doing and maybe bring him on in some capacity, given his former experience, to try to help with the situation down there. So hopefully we'll have Ricci on again. I really enjoyed chatting with him. All right, we like to end the show on Monday with some feedback from you, undivided subscribers. If you haven't watched our special episode Swing State Showdown yet, please do that. We posted on Patreon, Locals, and it's up on YouTube. And it's really about what I think is one of the most critical swing seats in the entire country in the November midterms, Washington's 8th Congressional District. We have in-depth interviews with the candidates, the two leading Republicans and the incumbent Democrat, Dr. Kim Schreier. Samantha said of the episode, "Thank you so much for these thoughtful interviews, Brandi." You're welcome. She said, "I'm a centrist Democrat in the 8th, and a part of me wanted to just vote D to try to keep the House, even though that goes against my principles, hence why I'm a huge fan of your show. Your interviews were exactly what I needed to make an informed decision about who I think will best represent our district with integrity and balance. I'm proud to be a swing split-ticket voter, and Reagan Dunn, won me over with his direct answers, political experience, and willingness to stand up against party and public pressure." ELJ 8916 wrote, "Great interviews, and this will be a fun and interesting race to watch in November. I think the GOP has two impressive candidates to challenge Kim Schreier. Jesse Jensen impressed me with his solid perspective on public safety and nuanced views on current issues." Linda wrote, Linda had a criticism of my interview with Dr. Kim Schreier. She wrote, when Schreier talked about inflation and high gas prices, you didn't ask her if she bears any responsibility for supporting the things that contributed to those problems. You're right, Linda. I probably should have pinned her down a little bit more on that. Representative Schreier had a pretty short time frame. We just had 10 minutes. We're going to do a more extended interview before the general election. And so certainly those are topics that are going to come up. Finally, I wanted to share with you the final results of a subscriber poll we did, talking about what your priorities are heading into the midterm elections in terms of how you're deciding who to vote for. The question I posed to you was, what do you prioritize when voting? I asked, as the primary election nears, which of these things would most influence what candidates get your vote? The options were political party, relevant experience, a familiar name, endorsements, or the candidate's personal platform. And overwhelmingly, you selected the candidate's personal platform, 79%. The second most important thing to you was political party, followed by relevant experience, endorsements, and a candidate with a familiar name captured 1% of the vote. Harold wrote, I look for record, platform, personal statement, and more, party in pretty much that order. Electability is getting higher on my list too. All the purity tests in the world are useless if they just keep pointing to ideologically pure candidates that are essentially unelectable in this state. The Family Castle, which I think is a family of subscribers, thank you for being subscribers, wrote, in the past, I've always voted for the person and not the party. This year, I'm looking at voting all R's and placing my vote on the most electable candidate that can bring balance and common sense in Olympia to our left coast state. Let's get one more in. PJ Madison wrote, I have always voted for the person, not the party. Unfortunately, when it comes to the presidential races, I voted for the person who I think will do the least amount of damage, not someone I'm genuinely supportive of. PJ, that's so depressing. I mean, I can't say I blame you, but that's funny. Moving forward, I will make sure to double down on the first and most important litmus test, where they stand on a woman's right to her own reproductive choices. So that's interesting that PJ says that reproductive rights is an important litmus test for him, and that when he votes in presidential races, he votes for the person who will do the least amount of damage. Kind of sad that that's where we're at as a country right now. All right, that's it for this episode of Undivided. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. We will have a great episode for you on Wednesday, which Wednesdays are for subscribers only. I'm going to talk to Adam Fortney, the sheriff in Snohomish County, Washington, who is standing behind Governor Jay Inslee when he made an announcement about expanding police recruitment across the state. I was dying to know what the sheriff had to say about that announcement, so he is going to join me on Wednesday to talk about it. So make sure to become a subscriber if you're not already. You can do that in two ways, patreon.com/undivided, or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Thank you to the founding sponsor of Undivided, 1530 Mortgage. Pay them a visit at 1530mortgage.com.